All right, hi everyone. My name's Emily. Welcome for the Design for Living Big Book study. With me is,
Elizabeth, alcoholic.
all right, we will be in How It Works on page 60 at the third step. You want to start reading?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And I'm going to stop there, even though it's not the full paragraph. First of all, I think that asking about step 3, just what does that mean and what do we do, is a great question. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. What does that even mean? Turn my will and my life over? What? Right? I've heard a lot of people say different things about what that means to them and our thoughts and our actions. And for many years, I misunderstood what thoughts and what actions I was supposed to turn over. And then somebody happily saw me coming from a mile away and pointed out this passage that we're about to read. And then the next sentence, the first requirement. So, you know how I always say, watch out when they use those strong words, right? They're not saying suggestion. They're not saying maybe. They're saying it's a requirement. And when people ask me, oh, but I have trouble with this stuff, I don't know how to do this. It's like, well, first you got to see how your life run on self-will is not a success. I couldn't see that for years. I didn't even know I was missing it. My ego didn't even let me see that I was missing anything for years, literally decades we could make a case for, right? So, because I always tried to make my life a success. That was my whole goal, was to make it a success, from a young age. I mean, I was told I was smart like my dad, you can do all this stuff. My dad would say, you should know better. So my whole life was about being self-reliant. So, and if it wasn't a success, then I'm screwed because I don't have any other options, right? I better be able to count on myself. I didn't have people that were really active, and, I was kind of the oldest. I learned a lot of things on my own, even in my career, I was self-taught with everything that I did in my career. So you're going to tell me that my life run on self-will is not a success? I had to crash at about 14 years sober. I crashed and burned in my life. I was miserable and confused. And then I started asking for help. And when I share my story, because it says each of us tells in our own language and from our own point of view how we established our relationship with God, I talk about the toxic relationship I was in at 14 years sober and how it was, trying to make that thing work to fix me ruined my life. I mean, everything fell apart because of that self-will. Some people call it the second surrender. And and I share that experience to hopefully save others and make them realize, yeah, man, I skated along on self-will and management, hung out in the second half of step 1 for literally years, and then it stopped working. And then I needed this program and I needed to know how to work it in my life. I needed to know what it meant. I needed to know. And my sponsor then did a very thorough step 1 with me on the second half of step 1. And then when we got to the end of chapter 3, I was miserable. I said, I'm miserable. And she said, and I said, am I supposed to be? And she said, yes, because you need to have no place else to go but God. And that's when when I saw this statement later on, it was like, oh, wow, now this statement really makes sense, that I have to be convinced, because I'm so good at ignoring when it's not. And that's the other thing that I have, is a selective memory, selective attention. I only pay attention to things that show me that I am being a success. You want to say anything about that before we move on?
No, you can keep going.
Okay. On that basis, so first requirement is to be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success, page 60. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous, He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits. I'll do one more and then we can both talk. Want to do that? What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. Still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? And this for me is the essence of what we're here to do. You know, this is the biggest thing for me to see how am I doing in my program, because if I continue to act like this, it's going to take me back to the first half of step one. This is what they're talking about, management. How am I trying to manage my life, my thought life? Not just my life on the outside, but what I'm thinking about all the time. What do I run around thinking about all day? Emily didn't call me back. Rob keeps posting stuff in the chat. It's distracting. Rebecca, God, she didn't even call me lately. What's going on with her? All day long, I am judging, criticizing, managing, like what people should be doing. I am blocked from a spiritual experience as long as I'm doing that. For every minute I'm doing that, I'm not present for what God might have for me here in this moment. And step 3 means to stop all of that. Stop it. My thought life, you know those shopping malls that have a food court? I've probably talked about this. One day it hit me, right? And they've got the Asian food and they got the American food and they got the, the curry, and people in England like. My thought life was like that. It had all these different topic areas and it was constantly going, you know? Step 3 is like taking a bulldozer and wiping all of that out. I'm clear now. I've given all that up. It doesn't need my input. It doesn't need my thoughts. It doesn't need my analysis. It doesn't need my judgment, my criticism, my opinion. You know, I'm here to suit up and show up and with empty hands, an open mind and an open heart to what God might have me do next. That's it. That's step 3, right? It's not confusing, but it's about getting me out of the way. And that's what these next couple pages are about, 61 and 62. But I can't tell you how many times I have lived on page 61. In fact, I did it on my trip that I was on last week, and I can see this and it calls me out, right? I'm like, oh God, I have amends to make. Don't tell my husband, he's not in here right now. You know what I mean? So yeah, and it doesn't come off well. And I didn't know. I thought when I came into AA, I thought I was a people pleaser, And I heard a funny male speaker say, his sponsor said to him, "How many people have you pleased lately?" After he said that. But a people pleaser is often a self-seeker. I'm doing something to get something from you, right? So it's not altruistic. It's not that self-sacrifice because I'm still thinking about self and what self wants. I'm consumed with outcomes still. I'm trying to make my life work a certain way to give me that security and that foundation that I'm seeking because I'm still not seeking it from a higher power. And making that transition has been very challenging for me. It's been repeated effort, repeated discipline, repeated failure, repeated recognition that I'm back in self. But it's a practice, because I want to stay in that place. I want the peacefulness. I want to be with my higher power. I don't want to be sitting around criticizing people in my head because that feels bad. And I don't want to drink over how that feels, and it gets worse. I think it gets worse. I've been sober a long time and the pain gets worse. Go ahead, Emily.
Funny that we're reading this today because this is where I'm at the moment. I have encountered someone recently that's in a local meeting and she wants to run the entire meeting. It's oh, you can't do this, you can't say that, like, so this reminds me of, she's like the actor that wants to run the whole meeting, everything that goes on. Um, how the treasurer picks up the money, and where we pick up on the reading and where we leave off, and all that, and she just wants to control everything, and it absolutely drives me nuts. I'm actually currently working on another fourth step right now, and just looking at that, because she's on my fourth step right now, because she's just driving me nuts. Just looking at my parts, just like, wow. um I haven't been able to like let it go. I've been praying, for that and all that, but just looking at, where we're at right now with step three, um, you know, turning our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. I have to be able to turn my will and my life over to Him, regardless of what goes on. Whether it's someone wanting to control a meeting, or, my job, or, whatever that wants to take control. And, I continually want to keep taking my will back, you know. And then, it says here, um, may be kind, considerate, patient, or generous. And even on the other hand, modest and self-sacrificing, or he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. I have to continue to watch out for that, because, when that crops up, I have to do a step 10, like a spot check. Um, but it's just funny how this book meets us where we're at, because uh, it's just how it just reminds me every day that I need to, live by this, regardless of, how many years I have, or days, or, whatever. But uh I just really like this section, because it just reminds me of, where I need to be at with God, and, being able to let it go, so um that's all I have for this, but I'll read. We are at the bottom of 61. Yes. Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining about the sad state of the nation, the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave, the outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self pity. Selfishness, self seeking, that is what we think is the root of our troubles, driven by hundred forms of fear, self delusion, self seeking, and self pity. We step on the toes of our fellows, and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self, which led us placed us in a position to be hurt. Yeah, this just reminds me of, when I have relationships with other AA people, or my parents, or all that, I have to continue to watch for, selfishness and self-centeredness, because, I could just be revolved about, Emily's world, and not worrying about anyone else. And, it can either be based off of, self-seeking, or, or if a fear pops up, that's just how I know that, I'm acting in on self, and not, you know, giving it to God. And sometimes, I do place myself in that position to be hurt, because then, I don't have God centered in on that situation in life. And that's, when self will run riot in my life, because then I'll start feeling a certain way, or feeling resentful, and I'm like, oh well, then it's their fault, but really it's me, it's a me problem. But yeah, I think that's all I have for that. Go ahead.
I'm going to take another stance on this that might seem a little off, but This is where BBC not being 100% an AA meeting, like, kind of helps me be able to do that, which is great. Um, you know, I've done some outside help. So when I think about these kind of statements that we're making, um, I had a lot of, I mean, we're recorded, so I don't want to go too far, but let's just say there are things I didn't get what I needed growing up, and there's still a wounded inner child in my heart, and she needs attention, and she needs people to pay attention to her and give her, attention, affection, approval, validation, right? And so, because when I hear things like this in AA, sometimes there's a part of me going, but what about me? Don't I get anything? What's going on? Do I have to sit here and talk about how selfish I am because I actually want just like some nice things from people? Like what, there's a part of me that has like is laying on the floor having a tantrum, right? And this is where my outside help has really helped me be able to stay in my adult and treat my alcoholism and not spill that part of me all over everyone. And not to say that I don't fail at that. Trust me, if you know me, I fail at that. But I do have that work that I've done in ACA and in therapy to continue to give that, like, to healthily handle that part of myself that needs those things from a healthy place and from people that are able and willing to be in that role with me, right? So that I'm not just walking around, because I've seen people try to like deny or diminish that part of themselves, and it doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work. They can't skip the healing of that. And I think that's a message that needs to be talked about more. AA doesn't treat everything, but if there's a part of me that's still unhealed and didn't get some things that she needed, that part of me is just going to take over. They even have what IFS for that. Um, internal family systems talks about that part of us can hijack us. And I've seen people have a PTSD response to life, and it takes them straight to the liquor store. And that's why it's important that we continue to like share about some of this stuff about outside help. It's always been emphasized and encouraged in AA that if you need outside help, get it, right? Because this kind of stuff can sometimes feel really harsh. If you have some unmet needs and some wounds, it's like, well, wait a minute, you know? And I don't want that part of me to take over, right? I'm an adult now, and I want to act like an adult. And I don't want that little girl that has unmet needs to like take over my life, because she has. And it was not a fun time for Elizabeth. And I don't think I would be sober if I hadn't done that work. So I just want to say that. Pisses anybody off, sorry. I'll share my number. You can call me. We can talk about it. But yeah, yeah, and there is more. There are actually groups that are doing some non-AA stuff and some AA stuff to kind of meet those needs. It's kind of cool. It's cool. We have a lot of options out there today. It's awesome. Um, but as far as what this is for, this is because I don't want to drink again. Because I know that I have a deadly disease, and I'm the one that has to change this self-pitying attitude. And I was the queen of self-pity. Woo! Oh yeah, call me up. I can tell you about 10 things, right? I also love that when we talk about the pause later in the book, slowing down, watching for those reactions to life, I get a little more when I can turn to God and say, okay, God, what should I do? That helps me get the pause so that I can choose how I'm going to act next. Right? Instead of just being swept up in this reaction and I'm feeling sorry for myself and you didn't do what I wanted and I'm going to write you a mean text and I'm going to tell you how wrong, and act like a child. I can stop and say, wait a minute. And I actively think about other people because I have to, because it's not natural for me. So I think, I wonder what Emily was doing today. Maybe she didn't have time to call me back. This is an example. She did not call me. We actually talked. Yeah, this is just an example. But like to actually actively think about another person and what's going on with them. I can make that choice today. And a lot of these things in the book, when we talk about things like producer of confusion rather than harmony, for example, I like to meditate on words like compassion, empathy, harmony. How can I be a producer of harmony and replace that reaction with something positive, right? Something that I can do. Am I willing to grow along spiritual lines? What am I doing here? You know? Am I still trying to wrest satisfaction and happiness out of the world? Am I trying to control outcomes? Or am I trying to trust God and try to be helpful and useful in my life to other people? And that feels so much better. It really, really does. It's amazing. But it's a choice I can make if I get the pause. I try to make that pause happen. I was waiting for it to happen naturally for years. Guess what? Never happened naturally for me. I had to look for it and decide I'm going to stop and have that discipline. And I was not a disciplined person, never have been. I had to work on that. And I did. And then the results were so great that I wanted to keep doing it. To stop, think, how can I bring harmony to the situation instead of confusion? How can I be helpful? How can I stop being self seeking, in this thing, whatever it is that I'm dealing with? Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to read this next one?
Yes. Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, wait, one more thing. I love the phrase made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt, right? I was an advice columnist once for a website, and the two most common questions we would get were, I fell in love with my best friend, what do I do? Or I'm in a bad relationship, should I leave? And in almost every case with the bad relationship, there were early red flags that were missed, right? People don't just become liar, cheaters, thieves, right? They were liars, cheaters, and thieves. Right? Unless they've really worked to change, like a lot of us in AA, right? A lot of us came in here as those people and we worked really hard to recognize it and change who we are, and have that psychic change, it calls it. But like if I'm wanting something and I'm ignoring the truth and being in self-delusion, right? It says self-delusion, then I'm going to put myself in a position to be harmed and possibly repeat patterns in my life that are harmful. And I don't want to do that anymore because I can't drink over them, right? So there's a lot of good stuff here with that. So our troubles we think are basically middle of page 62. Our troubles we think are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. And this is where I really love the idea of turning. And I learned so much from a man named Craig M. at Primetime Group, and he talked about the first thought that comes into my head, I don't have any control over, but I have control over what I do with it. And I can just, I love the Emmett Fox 7-day mental diet. It says, knock every negative thought out. Nope, no more negative thoughts. Done. You do it like really, it takes a lot of effort. And then I turn and I say, God, what do you want me to do? What can I do? Right. I think that it's amazing how it says, above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. And I need to know what the word selfish means. I didn't misunderstood the word for the longest time. I didn't know what the word selfish meant. I thought it meant, when you're taught to share your toys in kindergarten, you're taught how to share. Like I share, I'll give you all kinds come over to my house. You'll leave with stuff, right? I missed it. I didn't know that what it meant was that I'm constantly thinking about how I am affected by whatever anything happens. It is my first reflex. I walk into the dish. I mean, it's just constant. It's all day long, and I can watch it and laugh. I know people that say, watch your thoughts all day. What are you thinking about? Because a lot of times it's, when I first started doing this and practicing this in my life, it was just a constant hum of judgment, opinions, like I didn't even notice because my alcoholic life seems the only normal one. My alcoholic thought life was normal, right? Um, And then it says it kills us. This is deadly stuff because it leads me back to drinking. It can lead me back to drinking. I can't take it anymore. When I live a self-centered life, it is very painful. If you want to see some people living a self-centered life, there's some groups on Facebook. It's people who haven't even made it to an AA meeting. There's like AA groups on there and people just whine, complain about their problems. That's a very painful way to live. It's a self-centered way of living. And people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that. So me turning and saying, God, I need your help. you know? Because otherwise I'm thinking about me and what I want to get out of life, and that's the self-centered way of life. But it takes a choice. It takes getting into enough pain. For me, it took hitting a wall with this stuff over and over and getting into enough pain and finally seeing, oh my gosh, we're doing it again. I also attended a group that doesn't do drunkalogs. They only talk about this stuff, what we're dealing with now, after page 23, the stuff that centers in our mind. That's the primetime group. I really like it. It taught me, it helped me to expose the way that I think and operate in life so that I could see this stuff. Because I could read this and miss it. It doesn't apply to me. I have a really great reason for why things need to go my way here. Don't you understand? So go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed in just this one paragraph, it says self four times. Self will, selfishness, um, self centeredness, and self will. Um, you know, uh, we definitely like focusing in on ourselves instead of other people and of God. Um, it says here that there often sees no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. And then it says neither can we reduce our selfishness by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. Without God, we would be lost. I definitely would be. And I would be more consumed in myself than I would be, with sponsees, other people in the program, friends, family, etc. I like to stay to myself and like isolate and all of that. But the program kind of challenges me every day that I need to stay out of myself and get connected with other people and not isolate. But we had to have God's help. That is the ultimate goal for that, because I definitely could not do this on my own. If it were my will, I would not want to do any of this. I wouldn't be here speaking on a meeting and talking to you guys, or calling other people and checking in on them, or being present with family, friends, doing service work, whatever. I would just be doing my own thing. But that's just kind of what that reminds me of. Because we're all worried about our troubles and our struggles and all of that, and oh, poor me. But really, in reality, there's always someone that's worse off and better off, or dying, from this disease. And if we think about ourselves, we can't help other people, that are struggling and need help more than we do. So we had to have God's help and direction. And that's steps one, two, and three. you know um Making that decision, realizing our lives are unmanageable and we're powerless, and coming to believe in something, higher than ourselves. So, that's all I had for that, but I'll read. We're at the bottom of 62, last paragraph. This is how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was keystone of the new and triumphant arch, which through which we pass to freedom. Yeah, that just kind of reiterates what I just said. We have to give everything God, quit playing him and let him be in control. And, everything kind of just falls into place. It's just like, those stones that, we build by like a waterfall or something. And, as kids, I used to go to like the mountains and build, stones and stuff. And if they don't lay flat, then they just keep falling. And that's just kind of how my life will be if I don't ask God to be in control of my life. Then everything just starts crumbling in around me. But that is how we um get help, is we had to quit playing God, and realizing that he is the director of our life, and we are just his children that are trying to pass the message on to him. And yeah, that's all I had for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I absolutely love this, and it says this is the how and why of it, you know? And again, going back to page 60 where it says the first requirement, right? I'm not going to see it. I'm not looking for your God if I think my way still works. Just not going to. That's that defiance that an alcoholic has, right? I'm not going to. Defiance, Harry Tebow says, is the quality that permits us to look straight at reality and snap on or snap our fingers and move on unperturbed like it's not even happening, which allowed a lot of us to continue to drink and have consequences for a really long time. We just ignored it, and I got to see that. When I take women through the book, I do what my sponsor did with me. She had me do a lot of writing about how I connected with what was in the book. And the reason why is because when I write it down and I see it on paper, I can't not see it. It gets in. Because I can skip through, oh, I'm not a retired businessman lolling in the Florida sunshine. That whole section doesn't apply to me. Like I can really easily not see it because I don't want to, right? Almost none of us like the self-searching, page 25. Don't like it. Don't want to do it. But this for me also goes back to page 53 when we talked about the bridge of reason, right? I have all these safe havens. I have all these ways of dealing with life that I have used. I'm a know-it-all. I'm one of those people that has all the answers. Now, hopefully I've gotten a lot better. A lot of times now I keep them to myself, which is great, right? It's great for everyone around me. I know people that are, the eternal caretaker rescuer. I know people that are very charming and attractive, and it gets them by in life, right? It's the things that we know we can count on, right? I could always count on figuring things out at some point, right? I'm spent a lot of mental activity doing that. My sponsor said that, we get sober, we try other things that work until they don't work anymore. And I remember different times, in my sobriety where it's like, oh man, she said this would happen, like this isn't fulfilling and fixing me anymore. Damn it, um, and so when I'm done with all of that, right? And now I'm looking for an answer. Um, and we hope, right, that when I was in working with others, I went to Howard's meeting last night and they were talking about working with others and, getting to know the person you're working with. I ask people, especially people that have time, they're not brand new. I say, what's got you today? What do you think about when you wake up? What's the rock in your shoe today? What's bothering you? And then we talk about how that's playing God, you know, wanting that to be different. And it can be hard when life comes along and gives you the really hard stuff to trust God. And that's probably the most common thing. My sponsor's two most common quotes. Have you asked God or asked God? And if I had a problem, she said, you're not trusting God. Two most common things if I call her, right? That's the things she'll say to me. And some people, I think we mentioned it at some time in the recent past about the second step proposition, you know. How serious am I about giving up my way of life because it doesn't work? And do I trust that God has a better plan? And sometimes it doesn't look like it, right? And God's really slow. Can be super annoying, and we have to go through pain and trials. And like, if you're in AA, don't pray for patience because you don't just get granted patience, right? You're going to be in every long line for the rest of the day. Like, just, it's funny, right? You got to watch what you tell the universe. Just be careful as it comes back. You want me to read the top of 63?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, this is my favorite paragraph in the whole book. And I often say that my entire program boils down to the top of page 63. This is my whole goal, is to be in this paragraph all the time. So we've just talked about making God our director, our principal, all that. And it says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, well, wait, I want to stop there for just a second. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. And these are the third step promises, by the way. Also, you can write that in the margin if you want. So what's my job today, right? I stay close to God and I ask him what his work is. And doesn't that sound like step 11, right? We pray for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. It says, established on such a footing, we become less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. And I can promise you, I didn't understand this for a really long time. I didn't have this experience. I was so deeply involved in self-will and making it look good for so long that I didn't have an experience like this. When over the past 5 years, getting exposed to different messages of recovery online, going to groups like Prime Time, starting to see my thinking, starting to see my self-will, my God playing, and and then having enough times where it crashed and burned that I decided to try this. I don't just try stuff because people are like, "Hey, Elizabeth, this is a good idea. You should try this," right? No, I have to crash and burn and get into a lot of pain. Um, and so I did. And what happened was I did experience these promises. I started to see that this was a better way of life. That me walking around trying to analyze, fix, control, manage, answer, fill in the blank, have the last word, that stuff doesn't work. It wasn't a fun way of life anymore. But when I turn to God and say, okay, here I am, what's next? My husband says, next. What's next? And then I started to enjoy that peace of mind. And that's a great place to be. For me to just be sitting here, nothing's happening, whatever, and I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm just okay in this world, in my skin, in the earth, among you, with you. All of this comes true. And the more that I get that, the more that I want it. The more that I keep working for it. Go ahead, Emily.
I just have two things in the margin here. When it says when we sincerely took all position, I put God is in control, and then I have He gives us what we need, not what we want. Because if He gives us what we want, then we just don't rely on Him for anything. We get very comfortable, and then we don't get challenged, and then we go through trials, and then we expect things from Him. We don't ask and rely on Him. And then I put here seek guidance through prayer and meditation. It's just for a clear cut guide through trials and tribulations and stuff, because we can get comfortable in life, and if things get good and then things get bad, and then we just forget where we need to turn, and we keep going back to self. And we just got to remember it's that daily surrender. That's what helps us get through everything in our lives, whether it's good or bad. um and then yeah, we were reborn because we had that second chance or third chance or whatever, of when God saved us from our deaths, of our relapse when we came in. So um are we going to read one more paragraph and then stop?
Yeah. Yeah. Or
Okay.
we could just do the third step prayer and then, well, yeah, that
Okay.
paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, we're in the middle of 63 at the third step prayer. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood Him, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thy wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. We thought well before taking the step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. You want to share on that?
You can go first.
Okay. I just have an arrow pointed up to it, and that's surrender, because I had to get on my knees with my sponsor and pray this, and just surrendering everything to Him, and realizing that He has everything in His hands of my life, and that I am not in control. And it's a very powerful prayer. I was told multiple times, as well, just like write the prayer in like in my own words, and then fill it in the blanks, like in my life. Like if I'm struggling with something or um wanting to just personalize it, that has helped me as well, understand it, but breaking it down line by line and rewriting it, it has kind of synced into my brain, and it makes sense. So that's really all I have for that.
Yeah, it says it in the next paragraph about the wording was optional. Um,
Mm.
I just saw the thing about we were ready that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him, right? Um, so yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and admit this. Over my trip, I said it before, I got into a fight with my husband, right? And I was sure it was his fault, completely his fault. It's his fault, right? And I look back and I realized, well, I actually heard this talk by Ralph W. on step 10, and it just called me out. It was like, oh my gosh, Elizabeth, you're so selfish. Oh, you're the one who did everything. You created the whole situation that caused him to retaliate, et cetera, right? And I just, I tried to get with my sponsor and I'm like, are you available? And she said, well, I'm going to dinner right now. What's up? And I said, I think I'm too selfish to have a relationship and I don't know what to do. You know? um, because there's a part of me still like, I can look at this and say, can I abandon myself utterly? And am I willing to give up this selfishness? You know? And sometimes the feeling inside me is I don't want to. No, no, no. You want to see if I don't think I have an ego, tell me to apologize first to somebody when I think it's their fault, right? And it's like the Happy Days Fonzie where he's like, I'm so, and he can't say I'm sorry, right? And I feel that. I feel it. And it's so frustrating. I can't make it like, and then I have to turn to God. I can't make myself be different. The moral philosophical conviction. I can't force myself. I can't fix my own defects, And I have to turn to God and just say, help me with this. Like I'm just a little spoiled brat. I want my way, right? But I love that. Am I ready? Am I in enough pain over this? Because it is painful. It feels painful to be in discord with people, to be, in confusion, in all that mess. Anyway, that's all I have to say about it. I also am not a big fan of reading things so often that it's rote, that it doesn't mean anything anymore. I think it's important to mix it up and look for other spiritual texts that mean something to you. I love Emmett Fox Sermon on the Mount is one that I read. Of course, we're encouraged to do that also again in the 11th step. It talks about looking for that and expanding that part of our lives. And yeah, so sometimes I'll just pick up anything like that and turn to a page and read some of that, some of Emmett Fox. I go to some studies as well if you're interested. I'm happy to share with you where I go. And to help me get there, because addition by subtraction, right? By subtraction means less Elizabeth, more God. How can I do that? Well, I also need to go seek more God. I can look at 60 to 63 and see where there's been a lot of Elizabeth going on, and it's not fun and it doesn't feel good and people are mad at me and, but I also need to seek my higher power so that I can find out, like, what would you like me to do? And just be in communion with my higher power and start to build that trust. And as a person who's always on the go and has, ADD, I'm not a big like sitting still person. I've found more quiet time. And I've found that the reason I like to go to those studies is because it is a disciplinary thing for me to go and sit somewhere for an hour and participate, and seeking that to grow my spiritual connection. That's it.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, we'll stop the recording and then we'll open it up for shares.